Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to learn how to make this dress with a fan top and a gathered skirt. If that sounds interesting to you, keep watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed the tutorial. Let's get into it. So you want to start by drawing a horizontal line at the top of your pattern paper. And then you're going to take all of your horizontal measurements. So that's going to be your shoulder to bust, shoulder to under bust, and shoulder to waist. Once you mark those lines, you want to draw a line across, marking each of those measurements. So once you've marked your measurements, now you are going to draw out your neckline. You're going to measure 3 inches down and 3 inches across from your center front. And then you're going to take your French curve and you're going to connect the 2 lines to make your neck hole. Next, you want to measure your shoulder measurement. So this is going to be half of your shoulder to shoulder point. Once you take that measurement, you want to measure 1 inch down, and then you're going to connect that to your neckline to make your shoulder slope. Next, you're going to measure your arm depth. You want to measure this from your new shoulder point, and then you're going to take a ruler and draw a straight line down, and you're also going to draw a straight line across, and that's going to be your chest line. Folding your measurement tape in half, you want to measure halfway down your arm depth. From that point, you're going to go in by 1/2 inch and mark that point. And then on your chest line, you want to mark 1/4 of your bust measurement. Take your French curve and connect your shoulder point to your chest line, making sure to travel through that 1/4 inch point. On your bust line, under bust line, and waistline, you want to measure half of your bust span. It should look like this. Once you've made that marking, you want to take half of your shoulder measurement and use your ruler to connect that point to your nipple span point. To create your darts, you're going to mark 1/2 inch on the left side of your bust seam and 1 inch on the right side of your bust seam, and draw a line from your under bust to your waist, and then use your French curve to curve from the under bust to the bust point. Next, we're going to draw the outline of the inner bustier of this dress. So you can just mark a point above your chest line to a desired height. I went with 1.5 inches, and I used my French curve to draw out a shape of a sweetheart neckline. On the curve of that sweetheart neckline, I'm marking 1/2 inch on each side of my shoulder to bust line and connecting each line to my bust point using a French curve. Now I'm just going to shade out the parts of this pattern that I'm going to eventually cut out. So next, you'll want to measure 1/4 of your bust measurement at your chest line, plus 1.5 inches of seam allowance, plus the measurement of the dart that you're going to be cutting out. You're going to do the same thing for your bust measurement. You add the 1.5 inch seam allowance only, and then for your under bust, you're going to add the seam allowance plus the dart intake. And then you can take a marker and just outline the top of your pattern. So for me, I'm actually working on folded paper. So when I go ahead to cut out my pattern, I'm only going to initially cut out the outline of my top, smoothing out the edges of my sweetheart. And then I'm just going to unfold this and use a ruler to transfer some of those key measurements that I need to draft my back pattern without having to repeat all of my measurements. This ended up being a little bit of a mistake, which I'll explain in a moment, but I'm just transferring the details of my measurement. So next, you're going to cut out your front pieces, removing the dart intake. Next thing we're going to do is to align the 2 pieces of the pattern together at the under bust and the waist and tape that together. Now, to draw out the shape of the torso piece, I'm going to go to my under bust line and measure half of my bust span measurement from that center point line and just create something like a semicircle all the way up. Then I'll be using some interfacing pattern paper to just trace this out so that I can test and see whether this shape actually looks good on my body. I'm just going to draw a straight line from that curve, and then below my waistline I'm actually going to measure about 5 inches, and then I'm going to use a freehand to just draw a curve to my waistline. So I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to cut it out. I'll place it on my body to see what it looks like and see if I need to make any adjustments. I took up about 1 inch from the top and then smoothed that out to the bust line. And now I'm just going to draw the outline that I now like and I desire onto my pattern piece. So my camera died while I was cutting out the front pieces, but you essentially want to cut out all of the parts that have been emboldened with a dark marker in the video. So now you can put those front pieces aside and we're going to move on to the back pattern piece. First thing you're going to want to do is draw a straight line that is the measurement of half of your bust band from your center back across all your horizontal measurements. Then you want to add a dart to your pattern by measuring half of an inch on each side of your bust band line at your waist and then drawing the dart legs. The next thing you want to do is just to start to add your waist measurement plus intake plus seam allowance, and then also your under bust measurement and your bust measurement. So because at the back you don't have as many curves, you want to make sure to add additional dart intake in order to make sure that things fit snug across your chest. So to do that, I'm just going to measure 1/4 of an inch on each side of my dart, and I'm just going to connect that to my bottom dart legs. So that is the part that we're going to cut out. So this is where I made the little mistake. I didn't add enough space for my zipper because this dress is going to have a zipper. So I just taped on additional paper so I can add my zipper allowance. And from my old center back, I measured 1.5 inches of zipper allowance. I initially measured 2, but I changed my mind and said 1.5. And then to reduce my zipper bulge, I'm going to go in by 1/2 of an inch at my waistline and then connect that to my chest line at a slant. So instead of cutting out my darts like I would for my front piece, I'm just going to go ahead and fold my pattern along that dart area and use some tape to hold that in place. So this way when I cut out my fabric, it already has the dart intake considered. So I'm adding some markings on my pattern so I know exactly how to use this pattern piece in the future. If you haven't thrown away the yoke of your front pattern, you can actually use this to try to calculate the length of strap that you're going to need for this dress. So now it's time to cut out our pattern pieces. I'm using this twill fabric for both my main piece and my lining, but you can feel free to use any lining material that you want for this dress. For your front center pieces, you're going to need to cut out 2 each, one of your main and one of your lining. And then for your front side pieces, you're going to need 4 each, 2 of your main and 2 of your lining, making sure to add seam allowance to all of your pieces. And then for your back piece, you're just going to need to cut out 2 of your main and 2 of your lining. For this dress, I'm also going to use some padding for my front top bustier piece. This is the part that's going to be inside the fan of my dress, so I just wanted to have some nice support. So I'm just going to cut that out and I'm going to pair that with my lining and start lining up the edges of my center front top to my side front top. Then I'm going to sew those pieces together. I'll also do this for my main fabric, which I did off camera. This is what it should look like when I've sewn those pieces together and I've pressed. Next thing I'm going to do is to create my straps. I'm just taking 1.5 inch strips of the length that I had measured earlier in the video, plus additional seam allowance of about 1 inch on each side of this strap. Once I've cut that out, I'm going to go to my sewing machine and make a strap. And I'm going to take the straps and I will line them along my bust seam and sandwich the strap in between my main fabric and my lining fabric that has the padding. I'm going to pin all around the side and the top of my dress down to the other side, and that's what I'm going to sew. Here I'm just cutting out excess fabric to remove bulk. I'm also going to notch my seams along any curves and corners so that when I turn this inside out and press, it looks very nice and neat and it's not bumpy. So this is what it looks like when I turn it inside out. I'm going to measure along the bottom seam of this top bustier part. This is going to be the number I'll use to calculate the length I need for the fan of this dress. So the measurements you use to create your fan piece is 2.5 times the length of the lower part of your bustier that you just measured. And then the height is going to be 7 inches, but we're going to cut this on a fold. So you're actually going to multiply 7 times 2, and then you're going to add 1 inch for a seam allowance, which will give you 15 inches. Now you don't have to do 7 inches. This is just going to be whatever your desired length is for the fan of your dress. So off camera, I ended up ironing on some interfacing to my fan piece before sewing it to give it some stiffness and structure. You don't have to do this, but I recommend it if you want that very firm, structured look. So I went ahead and sewed the side pieces of my fan inside out, and then I serged the bottom, and I just used a straight stitch at the highest length in order to be able to pull on my thread to create a gather. You can also use a gathering foot or other methods of gathering that you know. So once we're done working on the fan, we can now start putting together our torso piece. I'm just laying out the 3 pieces that I'm needing for each side. I'm going to lay down my side piece right side facing and match up the seams of my side pieces to my center piece, and I'm going to sew that. I'll do this for my main and my lining. Now it's time to join the top and bottom pieces and your fan. So I'm just checking the length of my fan here against the bottom of my torso piece to make sure that I've gathered it appropriately. And here I'm just pinning it to make sure that the gather is evenly spread. And now for the fun part. You're going to take your torso piece, the front part, the main part of your torso piece, and match it up right sides facing with your top piece with the fan sandwiched in between. You want to be really careful when you are pinning and sewing this because you're working with curves. But once you do this, you want to then take the lining piece as well and sandwich that right side of the lining piece facing the wrong side of your top piece. So essentially, your top piece with the fan will be sandwiched in between the main and the lining of your torso piece. And then you're going to take this to the machine and sew. Once you turn this back to the right side and you press, this is what your top piece should look like. Now let's work on the back side of the top of this dress. The first thing I'm going to do is to mark where my straps are going to go on the right side of the lining of my back. This measurement is going to be the measurement of where your straps are placed in the front side of your dress from the side seams plus 1 inch. To correctly place your straps, you want to place the front of your dress with the right side facing up, and then straighten out your straps and pin them to the front side of the lining of your back. And then you're going to sandwich the straps in between the lining and the main with right sides facing. Then you're going to sew the side seams and the top of your back pieces. When you flip it inside out and you press, this is what it should look like. Then you want to pin the side seams of your back pieces to the side seams of your front pieces and sew. At this point, the top part of your dress is complete. So this is what it should look like when you're complete at the top part of your dress. Then you want to take your measuring tape and measure along the bottom of your torso piece, of your top piece. This is going to be the basis for the skirt piece that we're going to gather in order to complete this dress. If you've ever made a circle skirt before, we're going to use the same basic principles of making a circle skirt. I've added a link below for instructions on how to make a circle skirt, but I've essentially folded my fabric in two and then folded the fabric alongside an edge to make kind of a corner. And then I'm going ahead to measure the circumference of my torso piece that I just measured times maybe 1.5 to 2 inches, depending on what my fabric will permit me. And then from that waist point, that torso point, I'm then going to measure the length of the skirts that I need. You might need to use multiple quadrants of the fabric in order to get your full gather, but you just want to make sure that you made the waist wide enough that it's going to give you a gathered effect. So whatever you measured earlier at the bottom of your torso, you want to multiply that by 1.5 or 2 inches. Once you're done gathering your skirt, you're going to start to place it along the edge of your torso piece, of your top piece, right sides facing, and then you're just going to pin it. So here I'm just kind of spreading the gather to make it more even along strategic points of my dress to make it have a nice shape. Once you're done with that, we're almost done with this dress. The next thing I'm just going to do is to add an invisible zipper to the back of my dress. And then once I've added the zipper, I'm going to close the bottom seam of my dress and then hem my dress. So if you aren't sure how to put an invisible zipper, this is something that you can find a tutorial on YouTube, and then you can just use a basic fold over and a basic straight stitch to hem your dress. And then I'm going to take needle and thread and hand sew my fan to parts of my torso to make sure that it stays on. I actually recommend starting to pin this when you are wearing the dress so that you see exactly how the fan looks and you can sew it in a way that actually looks good once you've worn the dress. And that is it, my beautiful people. This is the final look of what the dress looks like. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you made this dress, please tag me at Imona Sews. I would love to see what you've made. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Bye!